Across the U.S., cities are bearing the brunt of homelessness. New York and Los Angeles account for about 40% of the unhoused population in the country. The growing problem is fueled by a combined lack of affordable housing and issues worsened by poverty like mental health and addiction. Those cities are trying to find lasting remedies. Well, in California, which is leading the nation in the crisis and prepping for the spotlight ahead of the 2028 Olympics, the mayor of Los Angeles has her own way.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass ran and won last year's election largely on a single campaign promise.
We are going to solve homelessness.
To house about a third of our city's 46,000 homeless by year's end.
What I did on day one of my administration was put the city in a state of emergency.
That kicked off her housing relief program, Inside Safe. This week, the city reported the initiative brought nearly 2,000 people off the street. That, combined with other homeless relief programs, got nearly 22,000 Angelenos into temporary housing. That's 5,000 more than last year, with an eye towards major upcoming events in the city.
I am hoping that all of the energy around the World Cup and the Olympics will bring the city together in a way that says we can't have the world come here and see 46,000 people sleeping on the street.
We spoke to Bass in September.
We have dispelled the myth that people who are on the street will not leave the street. And so we have not had a problem of people accepting housing.
Getting people into temporary housing is one thing, keeping them housed another. As of November and $67 million in, only 3,500 of the unhoused have found permanent places to live. The problem? There just isn't enough affordable housing stock, making it nearly impossible to find placements for those running out of time in temporary units.
How do you increase the stock available?
Well, we have to build it. But my point is that I don't want people waiting on the streets in tents while we're building. That's why we're getting them off the street, providing motel rooms for them, while at the same time we are expediting building.
Mayor Bass issued an executive order on November 1st, allowing Inside Safe to use vacant residential hotel rooms, many of which are permanent housing for low-income residents, as interim housing, which some say solves one problem and creates another.
The idea of removing the already too few permanent units we have, I think is the wrong policy at this time.
Barbara J. Schultz is Director of Housing and Justice at Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles.
According to the city's own housing element, we need 456,000 more housing units to meet the need in the city of Los Angeles. And 185,000 of those are needed for low-income Angelenos.
There's also the challenge of matching funding sources to specific communities, like the one at Summit View Apartments, which serves only homeless veterans.
After I got out the Army, I was suffering from clinical depression.
When 26-year-old Gene Casimir left the Army, he moved to Los Angeles, but couldn't find work. Here, he was able to get the mental health and employment services to get back on his feet.
I say this is the best place I ever found.
Where were you before?
Well, before I was living in a shelter for a year.
We want to be sure nothing triggers falling back into homelessness.
Stephanie Klasky Gamer is president and CEO of the nonprofit LA Family Housing, which developed Summit View.
In order to realize a vision of providing more supportive housing for people in need, there's a little bit of the city, the county, the state, federal government, and private investors to make this happen.
That complexity is part of the problem, especially in the midst of a post-COVID economy with high inflation where housing the poor isn't profitable.
Until we spend the money directly on housing, we're not going to have an impact on homelessness.
I don't believe that we have done all we should have done as a nation.
Secretary Marcia Fudge at the Department of Housing and Urban Development is trying to streamline that process.
The Biden administration has put a pretty lofty goal on the table to reduce homelessness by 25% by 2025. Is that too aggressive?
I think it's ambitious. I don't think it's impossible.
To aid the effort, Secretary Fudge raised the value of housing vouchers and released $50 million to support homeless youth.
We are doing all we know how to do because we understand that young people in particular, if they don't start to look at home ownership as an option, they may never be put in a situation to start to build the kind of generational wealth that our parents built.
But those measures may only fulfill their potential with more permanent housing.
We cut down the time it takes to build. So, for example, what used to take months in terms of permits now takes 37 days. If you are coming to Los Angeles to build 100% affordable housing, you essentially break through a lot of the barriers and we expedite your building.
She's additionally sponsored 2 more bills in the state assembly to do that.
Beginning in January, it will allow us to use a lot of city property. So we have city, state, county, federal property that is either vacant or is available for us to use. So we don't even have to be involved in purchasing property. It's to expedite the building on public lands.
Which is critical to organizations like LA Family Housing.
This site itself was formerly owned by the City of Los Angeles. They made surplus properties owned by the City of LA available to developers.
And also ensuring an equitable housing landscape.
If we just continue to only build in places where low-income housing has always been, we end up segregating poverty and segregating people in a way that is really contrary to the Fair Housing Law.
People are legitimately frustrated in this city.
Voters were frustrated, angry, and demoralized because voters have voted on 3 occasions to raise their own taxes. And every time they voted to raise their taxes, the problem got worse because even though the city was building as fast as they could, the city was becoming more and more expensive. So it's critical that I take and my administration takes a comprehensive approach. Thank you.
The clock is ticking for the mayor who promised to curb a crisis not just faced by the City of Angels, but one that plagues the nation.
And red tape, huge hurdle here. The mayor is also concerned that the end of COVID protections are going to exacerbate the problem. She says 30,000 to 40,000 people are now facing eviction.
Saying you're going to solve homelessness
That's huge.
is a pretty bold
takes
prediction.
time. Takes
it does, yeah.